Hello, welcome to the channel Why Stories. Enjoy watching.
At her mother-in-law's anniversary, the young woman noticed that her husband had disappeared somewhere. Mistaking one door for another, she accidentally overheard. Celesta Marin held a thick, glossy sheet of cardboard in her hands, with text printed in a beautiful, ornate font. It was an invitation to the anniversary of Irene Leva, the wife of the owner of a large, prosperous company, the mother and grandmother of a large family, and a person with a very extensive circle of acquaintances and interests. Celesta was Irene's daughter-in-law. Stories about the relationships between mothers-in-law and daughters-in-law are as numerous as the tales of complicated mutual feelings between mothers-in-law and sons-in-law, and they are just as full of cliches and prejudices. How many stories are told about unfortunate young women who fall under the power of wicked shrews who scrutinize every step and action of the young women who dare to lay claim to the most precious thing in life, their dear boys, their sons? And what about the endless stories of older women forcing their sons to turn their wives into domestic servants? Or the horrors of mothers-in-law spreading nasty rumors about their daughters-in-law's immorality? However, according to popular belief, it's rare for a daughter-in-law to remain indebted to the so-called mother. Celesta had always been skeptical and distrustful of such stories. It seemed to her that it was all some sort of folk tale, in which the girl must always be innocent, the young man kind, the mother-in-law a monster, and the daughter-in-law a fool. Perhaps Celesta was just lucky. Her mother-in-law was an unusual woman in every sense, one might say extraordinary, beautiful, proud, intelligent, wealthy, and happy. This remarkable woman simply didn't need to assert herself at someone else's expense. She was already unattainable. Irene was truly blessed by nature, beautiful without any reservations or conditions. She had deep, velvet-like eyes, full, well-defined lips, and a lush, glossy mane of hair. Though Irene was a blonde. Women felt an unhealthy envy toward Irene, while men had a very healthy and justified interest in her. Both feelings were strong and almost unchanged, despite the relentless passage of time. The fact that Irene still decided to celebrate her anniversary, and with quite a bit of fanfare, as the official invitation indisputably indicated, was, on the one hand, expected. After all, 55 years, no matter what, is a special milestone for anyone. And the particular magic of the fact that more than half a century had passed works on everyone, even the most ardent opponent of celebrating any events in their life. On the other hand, Celesta knew well how desperately Irene resisted the persistent attempts of her relatives, especially the head of the family, her loving husband Gerald Leva, to organize the celebration. Is it really necessary to remind everyone once again how old I am? And to do it with loud music, fireworks, and in front of a crowd, she grumbled. When talking about old age, the woman was undoubtedly being a bit coquettish. She didn't just look good for her age, she looked stunning. She was in excellent physical shape, with no financial limitations whatsoever, so no one, including the birthday girl herself, had any doubt that her so-called old age was a very relative concept. "My dear," her husband pleaded, affectionately calling his wife by the pet name he had given her many years ago when they were just 20-year-old students, newly married and beginning their long, challenging, varied, yet ultimately happy life together. "Come on, let's at least have a small celebration, just about 100 people, no more." Seeing the horror in his wife's eyes, he shrugged and quickly mumbled, "Well, how about this? Look, the kids, the grandkids, Anna and Felipe with all their family, Mario, Nevada, if they can fly in, of course. That's already 13 people. Your sister and her husband, my beloved little brother with his new girlfriend. I know you're not too fond of her, but what can we do? That's already 19 people." "Agreed," Irene replied mockingly. "And let's keep the remaining 81 spots in reserve, just in case your aunt decides to honor us with her presence. My dear, what about our friends, your girlfriends? And after all, I have a bunch of colleagues and partners who are eager to congratulate you. Well, let's say they're not so much eager to congratulate me as they are to curry favor with you, and they couldn't care less about me, just more unnecessary expenses. Speaking of expenses, I'll agree to this entire nightmare, which for some reason will be considered a celebration, on one condition: no gifts or wreaths at my pedestal, you hear? You can tell your colleagues and partners that from me. And our friends already know, anyone who brings a bouquet with more than 15 flowers or a gift over $100 will be kicked out. Warn everyone. Gerald sighed both painfully and happily. He was terribly pleased that he had finally persuaded his wife to have the celebration. It was an opportunity to finally gather their now quite large family at home. Their daughter Anna, who lived in the capital, would definitely come with her husband. They would finally bring the youngest grandchild, Cristiano, whom they had yet to meet in person. Their son Felipe would come with his wife Celesta and granddaughter Pedra, the grandfather's favorite. They were always nearby anyway since both worked at the company. And maybe, who knows, with such a turnout, their eldest daughter Nevada might fly in with her children, who were now quite grown and spoke Spanish with a noticeable accent, like foreigners. And, what seemed almost impossible, perhaps their youngest son Mario might also come over from England, where he was studying. Gerald's main concern was for those who would be invited, imagining the difficulties they would face choosing gifts and flowers under such strict limits imposed by the birthday girl. The Levas were an exceptionally beautiful, harmonious couple who had already celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary. Somehow, they had managed to preserve not only respect and gratitude for each other, which is not uncommon in older married couples, but also that genuine tenderness that makes your eyes sparkle when you look at the person you love. Gerald was convinced, and never hid the fact, that without his wife's support and help, he would never have achieved even a tenth of what he had today. And there was plenty to be proud of. Gerald was the owner and longtime head of a major transportation company that delivered goods worldwide. He had started many years ago with just 2 cheap, rattling trucks that seemed ready to fall apart, if not during this delivery, then definitely on the next one. Gerald sometimes laughed as he recalled how he used to drive one of the trucks himself in the early days and how he often still took the wheel when it turned out the night before that the driver couldn't make the trip for some reason. He earned money, took out loans, signed contracts, bought new trucks. In short, he got on his feet. Meanwhile, Irene, an economist by training, was having and raising their children, managing the household, working, and at night doing the bookkeeping for her husband's company. She was always there, both when everything was going well and when it seemed like things couldn't get any worse. In the mid-90s, the first significant money and opportunities began to appear. Unfortunately, big money always comes hand in hand with big problems. When Gerald was accused of hiding income and evading taxes, and was even arrested, Irene personally learned the difference between types of detentions, the addresses of police stations, prosecutors' offices, and law firms, those institutions whose threshold she crossed repeatedly in search of justice. In their case, justice ultimately prevailed, largely thanks to Irene's persistence and desperate determination, as well as the evidence she provided in the form of financial documents to the court. Gerald was released, all charges dropped, but neither he nor Irene would ever forget those terrifying few weeks. Irene pulled me out of it, Gerald would say with conviction. Without her, I would have gone to prison, no doubt about it, and for the full term too. Or maybe I would have lost my mind even earlier. I was weak back then, as it turned out, my stomach was acting up too. So, Irene would take the bus across the city every day to bring me steamed cutlets. One day, I was sitting there, all teary-eyed, feeling impossibly sorry for myself, and the worst part, there was no hope, I had already given up. So, I opened the food container, and there, on the rice, spelled out with peas, was the word "hold on" and a little heart. I nearly lost it. I thought, what kind of wimp are you? She's out there fighting like a lioness, with 3 kids, trying to save you, and you, a grown, strong man, are sitting here sniveling. It touched me so deeply. I got so fired up that the guards spent half the day searching me for any substances that might have made me so suddenly energized. As the case unfolded, Irene became fully immersed in the company's finances. Despite serious business growth, they still desperately lacked money. The 5 of them continued living in a modest 3-room apartment, driving used foreign cars with dented bumpers, and shopping for clothes in the most ordinary stores. She's just putting on airs, the overdressed ladies would say, unable to hide their irritation about Irene. Can you believe what she wears? But with her figure, of course, she looks good in anything. It was almost unthinkable for them to go further and admit that Irene, dressed not in brand name items bought at astronomical prices, but in a not new yet elegant suit that fit her perfectly, looked stunning nonetheless. The neutral term her figure was how these silicone beauties acknowledged Irene's beauty, seemingly untouched by time or stress. She transformed her husband, who for years wore old jeans and worn-out sneakers, into a true gentleman. "Gerald, you're the head of a company, not some guy from a bus depot," she would scold him. "What are you wearing? Suck in your stomach. Why are you slouching? You don't even have anything there. No, that tie doesn't match at all. You'd better go with the check shirt and gray suit." "Well, that's better. Now we can talk." Thanks to her years of effort, Gerald, who was naturally broad-shouldered and with well-defined facial features, had transformed into a man who caught the interested glances of women of all ages, social statuses, and professional backgrounds. "Well, I've created problems for myself with my own hands." Irene laughed. "I have no idea how to keep such a handsome man safe." However, for Gerald, no other women existed in the world. There was always only one, his Irene, the center of his universe, the love of his life. The family was a source of well-deserved pride for Gerald. Perhaps it was an even greater source of pride than the company he had built from scratch with his own hands. And here, too, he always acknowledged his wife's decisive contribution. "These are Irene's children, and I'm just on the sidelines." These slightly bitter words had some truth to them. Irene had raised their children, daughters Nevada and Anna, and sons Felipe and Mario, by herself, despite sometimes being as busy at work as her husband. Even when the family came into serious money and she could afford a nanny, no outsiders ever appeared in their home. The children, to the envy of everyone around them, grew up to be almost perfect. "Listen, you both need to sit down and write a book, How to Raise a Normal Child When You Have Money." Seriously, these days, that's a whole science, one of Irene's acquaintances, who had a teenage son, remarked with a touch of bitterness. The children did well in school and, as befitted the offspring of a respectable family, engaged in dancing, foreign languages, and tennis. Felipe attended a rock climbing club, and Nevada played the violin beautifully. Yet, all four genuinely respected and loved their parents and seemed to truly appreciate everything that had been invested in them. After finishing school, Nevada went to study in the United States. But even here, those who expected the LEVA system to fail were disappointed. Nevada really did finish university and started working. She didn't go off the rails due to lack of control. However, she didn't return to Spain. She married an American and lived happily with her husband and 2 children, sending her family photos from the ever-sunny, green California. Anna, who was just under 2 years younger than her sister, flatly refused to study abroad. She was a calm, homey girl, a mother hen, as the family jokingly called her. As expected, she graduated from college, married a boy she had known since childhood, the son of one of her father's longtime clients. She had 3 children growing up, including twin boys who, it seemed, might one day be capable of tearing down their grandfather's mansion brick by brick, and the youngest, who had been born just recently. Felipe, the 3rd child in the family, was the parents' main hope for continuing the family business. At just under 60, Gerald was still full of strength and energy, firmly holding the reins of the company. Yet, he and Irene would occasionally amuse themselves with their favorite game. "Oh, dear. Oh, dear." Gerald read aloud one morning. "My bones are aching, my head is shaking, it seems the time has come. So, old man, ready for the porch?" Irene smirked. The old man thoughtfully stroked his perfectly shaved cheek, adjusted the stiff collar of his shirt, and easily scooped his wife up into his arms. Felipe graduated from a prestigious university with a degree in law, completed an internship abroad, and after a couple of years spent in law enforcement at his father's insistence, became a legal counsel at their transport company. To the amazement of those around him, who expected Felipe to quickly climb the career ladder, he had been sitting in an ordinary staff attorney position for 3 years, handling contracts and seemingly contemplating something of great importance for himself, his family, and the entire company. Irene, who was used to trusting her husband's judgment about people and their value to the company without question, could only raise her eyebrows in surprise. "He just doesn't have it, darling, you know?" Gerald confided to his wife. "Not at all. Sure, he can draft a contract template, check the legal framework, things like that, no problem. But there's no spark in Felipe, no interest, no passion for the work." Felipe seemed content with the situation. He dutifully went to work, dealt with paperwork, and occasionally went on business trips. He didn't seem bothered by the fact that even his own wife, Celesta, had long since gained far more respect in business matters than he did. They had a daughter, Pedra, who, as the only granddaughter among the boys, was especially cherished by her grandfather. Mario, the second son, was the youngest and last child in the family, affectionately called Our Little Surprise by his parents. After declaring to everyone that she wouldn't have any more children, Irene realized just a few days later that she had been too hasty with her firm statement. "So, what are we going to do?" she asked the head of the family. "What do you mean, what?" "We're having the baby, of course," Gerald replied, not understanding what there was to discuss. "We're both in our 40s. People will say we've lost our minds in our old age." Irene laughed. "Who cares? I want a son or a daughter, or even two," the once again young father said enthusiastically. The baby was born healthy and active, just like the other children. Moreover, he was clearly the most handsome and talented of the four. It seemed as though Mario had come into the world just to drive the family's envy to new heights. He excelled in his studies, achieved outstanding results, swam beautifully, and could chat effortlessly in 2 languages, often switching between them with ease. He was tall and broad-shouldered like his father, but also possessed a refined, understated beauty reminiscent of his mother. Of the 4 children, he arguably inherited the most from both parents. After 8th or 9th grade, he was sent to study at a college in England, and almost no one doubted that Mario would eventually take over the family business, though, of course, no one said this out loud. With Mario's birth, an unexpected problem arose in the once harmonious family. Felipe took a dislike to the baby. While the teenage girls were squealing with delight at the new arrival, Felipe found his younger brother to be an unwelcome addition. "Why do you need him? To replace me?" Felipe whispered to his mother, swallowing his angry tears. "Felipe, my dear, what are you saying?" Irene hugged her son, alarmed. "How could Mario ever replace you? You're already a grown man, and yet you're talking such nonsense." "Yes, we've been spoiled," she mused that evening as she served Gerald dinner. "We've gotten used to everything being so smooth and easy. Now I don't even know what to do." "Do nothing," declared the family's chief disciplinarian authoritatively. "Felipe will get over it, and eventually, he'll get used to it." Whether Felipe ever got used to not being the youngest and therefore automatically the most beloved child is unknown, but no more complaints were heard from him. The family simply grew accustomed to Felipe's lack of affection for his brother. When it came to her sons-in-law and daughter-in-law, Irene was a genius. "That's my children's problem, not mine," she declared. "To me, they're all wonderful." When Celesta first met her future mother-in-law, she was simply stunned. "My God, there are really women like that in the world," she thought as she returned home. But as she got to know her better, she stopped being intimidated by this incredible woman. Her mother-in-law was impeccably polite and decidedly proper. She didn't tell anyone how to live, didn't try to be friends, and didn't allow anyone to overstep boundaries. In fact, it never even crossed Celesta's mind to try to befriend this queen-like lady. Irene had been the irreplaceable financial director of the company for many years, and it was truly a family business. A few years ago, she firmly announced to her startled husband, "That's it, I'm taking a vacation." I've calculated that you owe me 672 days of annual leave and 336 days of extra leave for the past 24 years. I'll take it all, and then we'll see. Now, she lived in a large country mansion surrounded by green lawns, grew roses, and, as she put it, enjoyed the leisurely life of a very wealthy retiree as she prepared to celebrate her 55th birthday with close and not so close friends and family. There were still 2 weeks left until the celebration, but Celeste rushed to the mirror as if she needed to leave in a few hours. Well, maybe I can still lose a little weight. Her thoughts flitted like frightened sparrows. Oh, damn, I meant to go on a veggie diet last month, and I really need to do some exercises. Maybe some squats? She opened the tall mirrored wardrobe, where a few of her evening dresses hung, bunched together in a small cluster in the corner. Celeste pulled them out, laid them on the bed, and stared at them doubtfully. There was clearly nothing suitable for the upcoming event. So, she had no dress, no shoes, no idea what to do with her hair. And overall, it was a disaster. She sat down on the edge of the bed and stared fearfully at her reflection. I need to call Alfreda. The saving thought flashed in her mind, and she immediately felt better. Alfreda Meyerles had been Celeste's best and, essentially, only friend since childhood. They had been inseparable all their lives, spending more time together than some sisters. Their families lived on the same landing, and the girls had been running back and forth between their apartments since kindergarten. They were fed in both homes, without distinguishing between who belonged where, helped with homework and advice. Sometimes, they even got scolded together by one of the parents. However, they didn't start school together because it turned out Celeste was a year older, though it was always the lively and mischievous Alfreda who took the lead in their little group. This friendship lasted through the end of school, after which the girls went their separate ways. Celeste pursued a law degree, while Alfreda, declaring that she would never earn a living with paperwork, enrolled in hairdressing and stylist courses. I didn't spend 10 years grooming and styling our poodle for nothing. I just got used to it, she laughed, explaining her unexpected career choice to her friend. Jokes aside, Alfreda didn't make a mistake with her choice of profession. It truly became her life's work, something she did with understanding, pleasure, and interest, and consequently, with excellent results. With a natural sense of intuition and imagination, she always knew exactly what each client needed. What the client actually wanted was only of secondary importance to Alfreda. With decisive snips of her scissors, she could instantly transform not just a client's appearance, but sometimes their entire life. Getting a haircut and color from Alfreda was the cherished dream of dozens, if not hundreds, of women. Her phone number was passed around like the most precious treasure, and people sought out recommendations as if asking for a great favor. Well, of course, Alfreda declared without false modesty when Celeste, laughing, told her that someone had offered money for Alfreda's mobile number. I'm not just fussing with your hair, I'm selling people happiness. Alfreda, Celeste laughed, what nonsense are you talking about? It's true. Imagine this, yesterday, a woman came in with a face like a horse's, long, with a huge forehead, and her hair just hanging like straw on her shoulders. She sits down in front of me and says, just trim the ends. Can you imagine? So, I trimmed them, chopped off half her hair into bangs, and cut the rest to shoulder length. She blinked, and then started bawling. And she cried so hard I even got scared. You? Scared? Celeste asked incredulously. Yes. I thought, well, that's it, there's going to be a huge scandal. And the thing is, I was right, with those bangs and a proper length, she instantly became a beauty. I shielded her from our dragon, the receptionist, and asked, why are you crying? She replied, from happiness. Celeste knew from personal experience that a successful visit to the hairdresser could truly make a person much happier. She naturally had a look that Alfreda referred to as perfect spy material. You know, it's impossible to remember you, Alfreda would say. No offense, okay? It's like, you're like a ghost. So, whether I'm here or not, it's all the same, right? Celesta would ironically twist her friend's words. That's not what I mean. Alfreda would snap. You're here, but you don't stand out at all. You're like a shadow, for heaven's sake. And honestly, you're my personal failure. My hands itch to fix you up. Oh, Celesta. Give me 3 hours, and you won't even recognize yourself. That's exactly the point, she laughed. I actually really want to recognize myself. Oh, you're so boring. Alfreda waved her hand dismissively and went on to give Celesta the usual set of treatments, coloring, and a light hair highlight. You could at least learn something good from your mother-in-law. I've seen your Irene once. Now, that's what I call style. After Alfreda's manipulations, Celesta would look at herself in the mirror and realize that Alfreda wasn't exaggerating much when she called herself a seller of happiness. When Celesta mentioned to Alfreda that she had an upcoming milestone birthday and wanted to look more presentable, Alfreda nearly broke the phone in excitement. Thank goodness you at least had the sense to call me, she shouted into the receiver. I don't even need to come over to know that you don't have anything suitable for such an occasion. What do you mean? What about that golden dress with the straps? Celesta asked plaintively. It's not golden, it's brown. And you look like a potato with a neckline in it. Alfreda ruthlessly retorted. For heaven's sake, you're going to a celebration with one of the most stylish women in this town. Can you at least listen to people who know what they're talking about for once? A few days later, Celesta was nearly ready and once again convinced that Alfreda knew her craft. Don't you dare lose or gain any weight. Alfreda commanded. I'll come over to do your hair the day before. I've got a few other clients from your social circle. The organization of the anniversary evening exceeded all expectations. A huge striped tent was stretched over the emerald lawn, beneath which guests strolled among light tables filled with snacks. Ubiquitous, well-trained waiters with trays of drinks appeared as soon as you thought about having something to drink. The soft music didn't interfere with the conversations at all. Felipe, Celesta, and Pedra arrived before most of the guests. As family members, they were supposed to help greet the arriving guests. 3-year-old Pedra, however, quickly dismissed all her mother's instructions and, with her grandfather's full support, ran off to meet her cousins, the children of Ana, who had flown in from the capital. Felipe quietly disappeared somewhere, leaving Celesta face-to-face with her mother-in-law. Hello, Celesta, her mother-in-law greeted her with a regal nod. Come, sit with me. Let's enjoy watching how our guests are ruining the lawn with their high heels. I told Gerald this wasn't the best idea, both for the ladies and the lawn. Now let him deal with it. Celesta sat contentedly beside Irene, sipping her favorite cocktail in small sips, and scanned the crowd for familiar faces. There were an unusually large number of people, mostly strangers, and it took her quite a while to finally spot those she knew. Apart from the always splendid patriarch of the family, Gerald, she immediately noticed Ana, surrounded by her boisterous offspring, whom she was trying hard to keep in check, as the boys had found strong support in their cousin, Pedra. Watching with concern as Pedra tried to drag one of the brothers between the chair legs, Celesta suddenly heard. Bringing children here was a bad idea, wasn't it? Irene looked sternly at Celesta, who suddenly felt like a guilty schoolgirl. When we get home, it'll be a different story, she thought grimly about her daughter's fate and heard the birthday girl's infectious laughter. I'm just joking, Irene said after laughing. Honestly, I'd rather clear out this stiff exhibition of fabrics, keep just the little ones, and let them have fun. Now that would be a celebration. She started talking to some of the guests, and Celesta continued to quietly observe the crowd. It was clear that neither Nevada with her children nor Mario had been able to come. With Mario in the middle of the semester, Celesta read her mother-in-law's thoughts. And I myself forbade Nevada from coming. Let her teach my grandchildren Spanish first. She really is an amazing woman. Celesta thought for the umpteenth time. How did I ever get into this family? Celesta was born into a family that was infinitely distant from everything surrounding her now. From birth, she lived in a simple 5-story panel building where neighbors wished good health to anyone who sneezed, regardless of which floor they were on. The building was old, with benches by the entrances and ever-present, all-knowing old ladies. Celesta's father worked as an engineer at a factory all his life. He was an incredibly calm and kind person. He tried to do everything in life correctly and thoughtfully, and only in one area did he miss the mark: marriage. Isabella Lozano was a sweet but capricious being, more than 10 years younger than Fresco Marin, Celesta's future father. Although the age difference seemed small, it turned out to be a chasm in their case. She wasn't just younger, she was 10 times more foolish and demanded 10 times more attention to herself. After accidentally giving birth to Celesta, she quickly realized that motherhood was not something she wanted to deal with for the foreseeable future. Consequently, Fresco essentially became the girl's mother. Isabella disappeared from their lives almost unnoticed. Celesta was too young to notice or be surprised by this. Fresco, of course, noticed his wife's disappearance, but honestly, he had no time to be surprised. The old ladies on the benches just shook their heads as they saw him running from the nursery with the baby in his arms, covered in shopping bags like a Christmas tree decked out in tinsel. He learned to make milk porridges and fry cheese pancakes. He was terrified when Celesta was ill and seemed to mentally suffer along with her 100 times over. He helped with her homework. While he, a trained engineer, had no issues with math and physics, the intricacies of the Spanish language left him completely perplexed. Thus, at night, he would secretly borrow his daughter's textbook and desperately try to understand the maddening phonetics and punctuation. He attended parent-teacher meetings, blushing under the curious gazes of young mothers and the sympathetic looks of the elderly teacher. He learned to wash colored clothes separately from white ones, braid hair, and even darn stockings, which wore out on Celesta much faster than he could earn his salary. As Celesta grew up, she felt the difference between her family and those around her. While single-parent families were common, a single father was unique to her. Celesta found this designation terribly offensive. "Forget about them, they're all fools," said Alfreda, Celesta's loyal friend from the landing. But Celesta couldn't just let it go. "He's not alone, he's not by himself. He has me," she stubbornly thought. So that evening, she sat down across from her father and placed a chessboard between them. He looked at his daughter in surprise. "I want you to teach me to play," the 8-year-old girl said firmly. They played chess and checkers, bingo and fool's poker. They went skiing and ice skating, read books, listened to hissing vinyl records on a dying turntable, made borscht, and then happily cleaned the kitchen afterwards. And Fresco was never a lonely father, and Celesta was never an abandoned child. They had each other, and they were happy. After Celesta finished school, she enrolled in the law faculty of the university. She studied well. At the diploma defense, there were some people present, according to one of the students, city firm representatives, that is, company representatives looking for potential and interesting young candidates. After the defense, a handsome young man in an excellent suit approached her, handed her a business card, and said politely, "Interesting work, Celesta. I mean your thesis. And the topic you chose, transport safety, is close to us. If you're looking for a job, come for an interview. We'd be happy to see you. Although, we don't have any open positions right now, but we'd be glad to add you to our talent pool." Celesta turned the business card in her hands and sighed with pleasure. Well, it's not a job offer yet, but at least there's interest in her rather modest self. If only she knew who was inviting her. She rushed to her favorite professor, who had supervised her thesis project. He was an experienced man and seemed to know all the firms in the city. "Torano, please advise me. I've been invited to an interview at," she glanced at the business card, "at Vega. Should I go? What do you think?" "Vega? A transport company? Oh, you're in luck. Congratulations. It's a great firm. The owner is an interesting guy. You know, one of those who does everything himself. And what's most amazing is that he's never been jailed, Torino laughed expressively, although, as far as I know, they tried to put him away. In any case, definitely go, Celesta. Definitely. Celesta's first visit to the Vega office was truly overwhelming. It was like something she had seen many times in American movies. A huge, bright building with glass walls appeared to be only conditionally divided into offices and zones. In reality, everyone worked in one large open space. Later, Celesta realized that the separation into departments, services, and management levels was done by floors, and the higher the floor, the higher the level of the employees working on it. The legal department, where she might be lucky enough to get a job, was located almost at Olympus, the 7th floor of the office building. "And who's on the 8th floor?" she asked, having counted only 8 floors on the elevator buttons. "Management," the clerk accompanying her to the interview location said reverently. "Heads of departments, deputies, and Mr. Gerald Leva himself." The name of the owner was pronounced with such reverence that Celesta couldn't help but laugh. The young man looked at her sternly and puzzled, waved his hand toward the open door, mumbling, "Wait here, someone from HR will come soon." And he hurried down the corridor, his entire posture expressing a firm intention to work diligently for a long time in hopes of someday receiving the great honor of stepping, even briefly, onto the sacred tile of the 8th floor. She entered the empty office and sat at a large conference table. Clearly, she was supposed to wait. Someone passed by the office, came back, and peered inside. "Hello. Are you waiting for someone?" A pleasant, deep male voice interrupted her thoughts. At the doorway stood a tall, broad-shouldered man. Gray hair, prominent deep wrinkles, and his hands revealed his age, evidently well over 50, but the way he carried his head, his posture, and the sense of energy he radiated seemed to contradict the information about his age. The suit he was wearing was slightly old-fashioned, but fitted his stately figure beautifully. Now that's a man. Celesta thought with involuntary admiration. "Miss, excuse me, but I asked you a question," she heard. The man stood at the table, hands clasped behind his back, and looked at her sternly. "Sorry, I was lost in thought," Celesta said. "About what, if I may ask?" "About your suit," she blurted out. "What about it?" His face showed genuine surprise. "Well, about the suit," she mumbled, beginning to feel embarrassed, but then stubbornly lifted her head and smiled. "It fits you perfectly. It's rare to see something like this." The man looked at her with interest, stepped into the office, and decisively took a seat across from her. "You're here for an interview, I presume? May I ask your name and the position you are applying for?" "My name is Celesta. I'm not applying for anything specific at the moment. I'd be happy to get a position as a legal advisor. Although I was told that there are no vacancies and that I might be included in the reserve." She looked into the eyes of the man sitting across from her. "So, you're a lawyer? That's good. Well, let's see what else you know besides suits." "I'd like to hear your professional opinion on this document," he said, placing a few stapled sheets of paper in front of her. Celesta took a deep breath and picked up the document. It was a standard freight transport contract, and it contained some fairly typical errors that were more likely due to carelessness or a lack of time rather than ignorance of the most basic things. The transportation of goods is regulated by a different chapter of the Civil Code. The specific penalty amount for late payment by the client isn't mentioned. And the word is spelled with not. That's about it. She shrugged, placed the contract back on the table, and looked at her interviewer. "Well," he said after a rather long pause, "if you want to work with us, you can start tomorrow. But you don't have any vacancies." Celesta was surprised. "You know, I have a feeling one will open up right now," he said, quickly writing something on a small sheet of paper. "Take this and go straight down the corridor to the HR department. Ask for the manager and give them this." He handed Celesta something resembling a note, consisting of a few words and ending with a rather elaborate signature. "Are you the manager?" she asked, unable to hold back, looking at the confident scrawl. "Well, I have a certain relation to the company's management." Yes, he replied. And you're probably from the sacred 8th floor? Sacred? He either coughed, laughed, or did a bit of both. Yes, I go there occasionally. As Celesta was leaving the office, she heard behind her. Estrelita, please call Elvio Claro from the legal department to my office. No, I'm not at my desk, I'm in the conference room. What? The interview? It's over already, don't worry. Yes, I conducted it myself. Celesta felt a pang of sympathy for the unknown Elvio. There was something in the old man's voice that suggested nothing good for the unfortunate Elvio. Well, looks like I've set someone up. On the other hand, the mistakes in the contract were really elementary, and it's such a prestigious firm. I'm no expert myself. Didn't even think to ask who I was talking to. Maybe it's just a local eccentric in a magnificent suit. It would be quite a laugh if they now advise me to stick this note somewhere out of sight. But within a few minutes, Celesta realized that, unknowingly, she had been talking to someone very important. The head of the HR department, a tall, prim young woman, looked at the note and then cast a frightened glance at Celesta. You're from Gerald, she said, her voice instantly hoarse. Hello, please, come in. I don't know any Gerald. Oh, he must be the man who spoke with me. He didn't introduce himself, and for some reason, I didn't ask him to. What? You spoke with Gerald and didn't even know it? That was Gerald Leva, the owner and CEO of our company. So Celesta found herself working as a legal advisor for contractual matters at Vega. The job was interesting and promising, the salary was good, and the people around her were quite satisfactory as colleagues. She quickly adapted to the daily routine of the large office, and life settled into a calm, typical pattern. The surprises began when Mr. Leva appeared out of the blue in their large office. After talking to some of the staff, he suddenly stopped at Celesta's desk. So, how are you settling in? He moved closer, gave her a subtle wink, and whispered, How do I look today? Everything okay? Is the suit all right? Celesta looked at him in astonishment and, smiling discreetly, gave him a thumbs up. How do you know the boss personally? Olivia Narvaez, sitting at the neighboring desk, couldn't contain her curiosity. He hired me, Celesta shrugged. It happened by chance. Wow, what a coincidence, her neighbor whispered excitedly. You know, you should take advantage of such coincidences. It might be a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. What are you talking about? Celesta stared at her in confusion. Are you kidding me? The girl's eyes widened. Leva, what a family. You have no idea how much they have. And by the way, the boss's son works here, Felipe. Yes, as a simple lawyer. A simple lawyer? Celesta was surprised. Gossip about the family and the wealth of the company's owners didn't interest her much. But the fact that the owner's son worked in a regular position did surprise her. Yeah, can you believe it? They put on a show, playing at democracy, like, look at us, we're so principled. We keep our own son in a regular job. The girl clearly went off on a tangent, and Celesta hurried to end the conversation. So, Felipe, whom she had already interacted with a few times for work, was not just a namesake or a poor relative of the director as she had thought, but his own son. Quite a family. Well, it wasn't her concern. Celesta had regular contact with Felipe. They worked in neighboring offices, focused on the same area of work, and often exchanged information, data, and documents. He struck her as a very reserved person, keeping a serious distance from everyone in the office, which, considering his background, was quite understandable. The other employees had long gotten used to him, and the constant presence of the boss's son didn't cause them much discomfort, but they didn't try to become too familiar. He was steady, polite, and seemed very lonely. He appeared to be constantly immersed in somewhat gloomy thoughts. He carried out his assigned tasks responsibly but in a mechanical, unenthusiastic manner. How is that possible? Celesta wondered to herself. He's the heir. He should be passionate about the business, care about it, and take an interest in every detail. After all, he is the future owner of the company, yet he acts like he came here from an employment agency. The most surprising thing was that it was precisely assigned work, as if Felipe were a hired hand and an outsider to the company. He never showed any initiative, didn't seek to make decisions, take responsibility, and generally acted as if he couldn't care less about what would happen to the company tomorrow. 6 months after Celeste started working at Vega, Felipe didn't come to work. They say he broke his leg, the office's local know-it-all and gossip queen immediately reported. It's a complicated fracture, he'll be bedridden for at least a month. Oh. If only I could lie around in such a place, I'd agree to anything. A few days later, Felipe called her number. Celeste, hello, he said. You probably heard about my little mishap? Here I am lying around and feeling my brain dulling from idleness. I decided to work, realized I don't have the documents. Could you, please, bring me something? Me? Celeste was surprised. Oh, please don't be offended. I'm not so brazen as to use you as a courier, but I wouldn't want anyone else touching my papers, a courier or a driver, even if they are reliable. You see, it's confidential information. So you trust me? What if I'm just waiting for a chance to snoop through your papers? She joked. I trust you, he said firmly. Can't I just send you the necessary documents by email, for example? She wasn't keen on wasting precious time and trekking to an unknown location for a few pieces of paper, even if they were important to the director's son. Yes, of course. But you see, my daily planner with the necessary notes is in there. I guess I need it the most. You can't just send it like that, he said, sounding dejected. Well, never mind. To hell with the papers, I'll manage. Celeste suddenly felt a pang of guilt. The man was lying with a broken leg, had called for help, and here she was being difficult. What a self-important businesswoman she was. Besides, it was unlikely Felipe meant taking public transportation. All right, I'll bring everything, she decided. But how will I get to you? I don't even know where to go or how to get there. Oh, you don't need to worry about that. I'll send a car for you. His voice carried such relief that she felt even more ashamed for almost refusing to help. An hour later, the car arrived at the Leva mansion. And what a sight it was! This was not some enormous, tasteless house that overwhelms and destroys the imagination. Behind the wrought iron fence stood a large yet elegant building made of white brick with enormous windows that somehow seemed to float above the emerald lawns surrounding the house. Celeste sighed in admiration. Around the house, there were magnificent roses and sprawling hydrangea bushes that looked like enormous balls. Everything around clearly spoke of serious wealth, but wasn't flashy, garish, or pompous. The Leva family undoubtedly had a good sense of taste. She was escorted deeper into the house, to the second floor. In a large room, Felipe lay on a special bed with traction equipment. His leg, casted up to the hip, was elevated in special slings. He looked considerably gaunt, pale, and, as usual, his face, covered with stubble, bore an expression of boredom and indifference. However, upon seeing Celeste enter, he brightened up a bit and even managed a smile. Here's everything you asked for. She handed Felipe a hefty package. He immediately opened it, pulled out a small daily planner with a beige leather cover, and for some reason tucked it under his pillow. Celeste thought she saw him sigh in relief as he did so. Thank you, Felipe said. You have no idea how much you've helped me, Celeste. Oh, don't mention it. It was nothing really. I just brought some papers, but I got to skip work and admire your wonderful roses. Ah, that's all thanks to my mother, Felipe chuckled. She's obsessed with those roses, spends whole days tending to them, always with scratches on her hands. She tends to the roses? By herself? Your mother? Celeste couldn't believe that the wife of such a wealthy man would tend to flowers herself. She had imagined that such ladies spent their days at spas, with personal assistants attending to every detail of their nails. I have unusual parents from every perspective, especially my mother, Felipe said, smirking again for some reason. Celesta thought that for a conversation about beloved parents, Felipe's expression seemed oddly inappropriate. Here I go again, sticking my nose where it doesn't belong, she chided herself and said aloud. Well, Felipe, get well soon. I should head out, maybe I can still do something useful. She stood up from the chair she had been sitting in. Celesta, if you have some time, please stay with me a little while, Felipe said unexpectedly. For some reason, Felipe seemed to her so abandoned, lonely, and unhappy that tears almost welled up in her eyes. Get a grip, you silly fool, Celesta told herself. He's the son of a multimillionaire, almost the owner of a huge company. You're standing in the middle of a massive house. You've only seen such houses on TV and you're going to pity him? No, Celesta, you clearly have some issues. Today is just. Everyone has left, and here I am lying all alone, he said with a smile. Well, Felipe, doesn't anyone come to visit you? Celesta asked playfully to keep the conversation going. No one, Felipe sighed. It's, the plight of all rich kids who studied abroad. And in my case, on another continent. All my friends are far away. And here, only the close ones are around, he suddenly smirked. And people like to be friends with heirs. I'm just a prince in a supporting role. Celesta didn't quite understand his strange rambling, but the ironic term rich kid he used for himself was jarring. Well, you're no rich kid, Felipe. You work and you're a good person too. He looked at her with interest. You're lying, of course, he sighed, but it's still nice. No one has ever called me a good person before. Felipe warmed up to the conversation and became more cheerful. They unexpectedly found common topics to talk about. Felipe, when not lost in his own thoughts, turned out to be sociable, witty, and an interesting conversationalist. He read a lot, was well informed, and most importantly, had traveled around the world and lived in several countries. For Celesta, whose knowledge of the world was limited to her hometown and a few childhood trips to the sea with her father, it was like listening to stories about another galaxy. Seeing that his tales were being listened to with unprecedented interest and even some excitement, Felipe got into the swing of things and enthusiastically shared anecdotes from his overseas student life, skillfully weaving in names of landmarks. They didn't even notice as it began to get dark outside the large window overlooking the garden. Oh, how will I get home? Celesta suddenly remembered. Don't worry, I'll have a driver take you, Felipe promised and called for the driver. Well, thank you. I really enjoyed it, she said sincerely. What are you saying? Thank you. Maybe now I won't be miserable, at least until tomorrow. Listen, he exclaimed, as if a sudden idea had popped into his head. Why not come again? Just like that, without any paperwork, out of simple human compassion. I don't think that's a good idea, Felipe, Celesta said hesitantly. It would be inconvenient, and I wouldn't want people at the company to. At the company, no one will find out. I swear, he said, returning to his usual frown. I don't want any gossip either. I really don't care what people think about me, but I'd like to protect you from all of that. All right, I'll try to visit you again sometime, I promise, she said, extending her hand to Felipe and feeling his strong, firm handshake. I'll be waiting, she heard him say as she left. Celesta had very mixed feelings about this visit. On the one hand, Felipe turned out to be far from the boring bore she had imagined him to be at work. She felt he had shown genuine interest in her. At least, for her sake, he had dropped his mask of the bored air and become a completely normal person. On the other hand, the gulf between them was so vast that she didn't even want to think about anything beyond a purely professional relationship. And besides, it seemed like it was all just the whim of a bored rich kid, as Felipe had called himself. Celesta pushed all of this out of her mind and focused on work and the challenging and important question of what to give her father for his birthday. A few days later, Felipe called her again. Hello, Celesta, he said formally. I wanted to remind you of your commitment. She looked at the phone in confusion and put it back to her ear. What commitment, Felipe? What are you talking about? She asked in a whisper. Well, hello. What about the promise to visit me? I didn't promise anything, Felipe. I said I'd try, she said, surprised and genuinely thrown off by the unexpected call. Well, then please try, he pleaded. I'm asking you very much. Otherwise, I'll just die of boredom. All right, she said, glancing at the calendar hanging on the wall with a sense of resignation. Tomorrow was Saturday, and she had other plans. But in the end, there's such a thing as basic human compassion. If I come tomorrow around 3, will you be home? She said the words and only moments later realized what a silly thing she had just said. Laughter came through the phone. It was the first time she heard Felipe laugh. You know, I'll probably be here, so come on over. I'll be waiting, he said, stopping his laughter. The next day, Celesta arrived at the Leiva residence. After her usual admiring sigh at the rose bushes by the entrance, she made her way to the second floor. Felipe was lying in the same position, but he seemed like a different person. He wore a white shirt, his face was clean-shaven, and his hair, which had hung in dirty icicles during their last meeting, was now shiny and neatly combed with some product. Felipe smiled and extended his hand to Celesta. So that's why Felipe dressed up today? I was wondering what the occasion was. He finally shaved, dressed up, and aired out the room. A woman entered the room, very beautiful, with expertly applied makeup accentuating her eyes, carrying her lovely head as if it were the most precious treasure. Has the Countess mother come to visit her injured Count's son? Felipe said with a smirk. Don't bestow us with noble titles, my son. We don't have any, we're just simple people, not without flaws. And our main flaw is that we're rich. But we're working on it, the woman said, looking at Celesta with her astonishing velvet eyes. Ah, the famous Madame Irene Leiva, about whom office gossip still spins legends, Celesta thought. Indeed, the office gossips hadn't exaggerated about her beauty and commanding presence. And she wielded that presence effortlessly. People wanted to listen to her and watch her. Celesta just stared, like a rabbit caught in a snake's gaze. The woman sniffed and said, You've become surprisingly rude since your accident, Felipe. Will you introduce us, or should we manage without you? Celesta, meet my mother, Irene, in person. Mom, this is Celesta, our company's lawyer. Father himself recently hired her. If she knew how, Celesta would have probably performed a deep bow. Wait. Irene seemed to remember something and smiled broadly. Aren't you the one who complimented my husband on his suit? He told me all about how you discussed his appearance during your interview. Well, Irene, you know, Gerald is exaggerating a bit. I just couldn't help but admire how the jacket fits him. It really is quite impressive. And you know, darling, that's a compliment to me, not to my old rascal. If you knew, Celesta, how long and painfully I had to drag him out of his training suits with colored stripes, she rolled her eyes and playfully shook her head. Thank you. You should also compliment her on the roses. If you do, she'll be over the moon. Felipe chimed in from his seat. Overall, the day went wonderfully. They had tea on the veranda, and the conversation, skillfully led by Irene, didn't tire Celesta at all. She was amazed to realize that now Felipe's mother knew practically everything about her. She'd make a great security officer. Celesta thought. Later, they played a game of chess, and Celesta won in 10 moves, leaving the sick Felipe in deep thought before heading home. Come visit us again. We'd be very happy to see you, Irene said as they said their goodbyes, and for some reason, Celesta had no doubt about the sincerity of these words. Felipe recovered and, though slightly limping, returned to work. After a while, the office was stunned by the astonishing news. Felipe was openly pursuing Celesta, the new lawyer from the legal department. Well, you're quite the piece of work, Olivia, the office neighbor, drawled. You were pretending to be all innocent and clueless, and then, surprise. Celesta shrugged and left the office. Felipe, she said, looking very serious, why are you doing this? Now I have to leave the company. I just can't work here anymore. Do you think I can endure all these smirks and nasty smiles directed at me? There won't be any smirks or smiles directed at you. Everyone will shut up, he said. They'll shut up as soon as you agree to marry me. Is this a proposal? She asked, stunned. Yes, he finally blushed a bit. Sorry, it was supposed to be more romantic, more formal. But since it's come to this, I want to ask, will you marry me, Celeste? No, of course not, she exclaimed, bursting into tears. A few days later, Celeste and Felipe were sitting in the Leva living room, with Irene seated across from them and Gerald nervously fidgeting nearby. Celeste, I apologize for the manner in which the proposal was made, Irene said. Believe me, it was due to nerves. But what matters is not the manner but the content. I ask you, rather, she glanced at her husband, we ask you to accept Felipe's proposal. What? Celeste stared at the woman. But I was sure. I thought that I would be against you? Irene finished her thought. And why, exactly, should I be against you? Because you don't belong to the so-called golden youth? Well, neither did I. I was a simple, happy student, then I married a cheeky, handsome guy, and we worked hard like two horses, and then we had a stroke of bad luck, she smirked. You see, we got rich. And as for the golden youth, she continued, you know, gold is of very dubious quality, as they say, samovar gold. But you, Felipe, seem to be the real thing. Can you forgive me such impudence? Gerald couldn't hold back and, rising from the chair where he had been restrained only by his wife's stern look, dashed off for the champagne. Are you sure this is what you want? Her father asked. Do you love him? Yes, I do love him, she replied. And you're not confusing love with pity? Her father looked at her closely. Dad, I want to be with this person, and that's it, she exclaimed, hugging her father around the neck and not noticing as he slightly and skeptically shook his head. Memories of her path into the Leva family flashed by in moments, and Celeste returned to the celebration. Felipe was still nowhere to be seen among the guests. Felipe. He's been acting strangely lately, constantly disappearing, endless errands, becoming nervous and irritable, looking awful. Against the backdrop of her flourishing parents, this was especially noticeable. Ana, it seemed, had managed to calm the children a bit, who had turned from 3 to 4 due to Pedro weaving around their legs. Exhausted, she finally spotted Celeste and waved her hand in greeting. Across the lawn, her husband approached at a brisk pace, stuffing multiple canapés into his mouth as he walked. Without nearly stopping, he lifted little Cristiano onto one shoulder and Pedro onto the other, and, shouting something joyfully, ran across the grass. Following him, the twins howled in 2 voices. With the shrieking of the little ones, this cheerful group made enough noise to rival an entire tribe of Native Americans. Seeing the noisy group scare away the elegantly strolling guests, Irene smiled contentedly. Well, finally, she said. At least someone is having fun. By the way, Celeste, where is your father? He did receive my invitation and even kindly responded that he would come. If Dad promised, he'll definitely come, Celeste said confidently. Unless something happens at the factory. And look, yes, there he is. She saw her father walking across the lawn, a little nervously but confidently, and she noted with pleasure that he looked no worse than most of the men present. The only concern was the bouquet in his hands, which clearly exceeded the usual limit. Oh, my knight, the celebrant cooed, rising to meet Fresco. You managed to come to me, idle fellow? How wonderful! Perhaps I'll leave my shabby nouveau riche and focus on this youthful engineer. Don't worry, she added in a whisper, effortlessly reading Celeste's thoughts as always. I'll accept any bouquet from your father, I have no doubts about his sincerity. Leaving her mother-in-law and father to exchange streams of compliments and jokes, Celeste went in search of her husband. Additionally, she suddenly felt the urge to use the restroom, so Celeste walked briskly toward the house. The large hall greeted her with a coolness and silence, which was particularly pleasant after the constant buzzing of voices, loud laughter, and sounds of music. She and Felipe had long lived in an apartment in the city, and she rarely visited this house, but she remembered the guest restrooms located somewhere under the huge staircase. Venturing deeper into the house, she stared at several identical doors opening into the corridor. What kind of charades are these? She laughed to herself. Where are the familiar signs? How is she supposed to figure out where to go? Waving her hand, she pushed open the nearest door and peered inside. It was definitely not a restroom. It looked like a storage room for cleaning supplies. A huge shelf with dozens of cans, boxes, and bottles divided the room into two halves. Suddenly, she heard sounds from the back of the room that resembled a muffled conversation. How awkward. I've intruded where I shouldn't have. And now I'm eavesdropping, she thought, and immediately wanted to quietly close the door behind her, but her ear was caught by an unusually familiar word, Transego. This strange name belonged to a company that had long been the main competitor of Vega, but recently seemed to have quieted down, slowing its pace as if preparing to leave the transportation market. How? Hold your horses. Leva Sr. chuckled. They're up to something, distracting attention. But never mind. What matters is winning the tender for the metal structures for the new plant, and then I can retire. Oh, I don't like this calm before the tender bidding. It looks like a setup. Who would think of discussing business, mentioning a competitor's company, in a whispered conversation in a storage room of an empty house? Celesta's palms became cold and sticky with sweat. She cautiously moved closer, completely hidden by the shelf, and the human voices became clearer and louder, although they were clearly trying to muffle the sounds. She strained her ears and began to distinguish words and phrases. Transego is in huge debt. And this tender that your father is aiming for is my only hope. I can't take you down openly, so I need information. The male voice spoke with precision, despite having to whisper. But I've already provided everything you asked for, our entire client base. The response sounded pitiful, humbled, and pleading, and for some reason, it seemed very familiar to Celesta. I don't need the names of the company, the phone numbers of the client base. Don't take me for a fool. I can get those numbers from the phone directory. The voice sounded irritated and angry. I need the information we discussed last time, the transportation conditions, the nature of the cargo, real tariffs, information about your special discounts, and not just what's written in the contracts. I need the full picture of the terms on which Vega works with each of its clients. Do you hear me? What are you mumbling about? Please, be quiet, don't shout, we might be heard, the other voice pleaded. Celesta's heart seemed to freeze, then it thudded dully and beat rapidly and so strongly that she was frightened. It felt like the pounding would be heard. The responding voice belonged to Felipe. There could be no doubt about it, and as if to make sure she had no doubts, she heard. You know, Felipe, it's your problem that you have to hide here among the cleaning supplies. I had to come and bother your mother with my congratulations, and she can't stand me, never could. Remember, there are only 15 days until the tender. If I don't get real information about your deals, it will all be pointless. I don't understand. Felipe's voice trembled and broke. Why all the information? You must really be as dull as they say, Felipe's interlocutors seemed to sneer. I need to deal with your father and his creation once and for all. I'm tired of picking up crumbs after you. I want everything. If I release the information about your deals into the public domain, no businessman in this world will ever shake hands with your father again. Isn't that clear? But you'll destroy us completely. Felipe seemed on the verge of tears. Listen, I can't. Felipe, you're not in a position to negotiate. What difference does it make how much and what kind of information you sell me? Come on, Felipe, let's go. Give me a little more time, Felipe's voice cracked. How much? Came the clear question. How much time do you need? 10 days, Felipe mumbled. Too long, his interlocutor replied ruthlessly. A week. But that's impossible. Felipe was so frightened that he forgot about the need for secrecy and cried out, but quickly caught himself and began to whisper, swallowing his words. Don't you understand? The data you're asking for isn't in the contracts. We need to get hold of my father's records, somehow access his correspondence. And much of it isn't on paper but in his head. It will take time to gather it all. We've already discussed the time. We won't revisit this issue. The person clearly decided to press Felipe and persistently demanded what he wanted. And about the funds, you should have done all this a long time ago, especially considering the money you received for it. Money? What good are these funds to me? I haven't had them for a long time, you know that. You should understand. Quiet, Felipe. I'm not interested in your personal problems. By the way, on a personal note, you have a charming little girl and a very lovely wife. You wouldn't want anything unpleasant to happen to them, would you? Celesta felt a sudden, intense wave of nausea, and it seemed like she was about to collapse. Clutching the shelf, she managed to stay on her feet. Fortunately, the cleaning supply shelf was sturdily built and secured, like everything else in the Leva house, and remained in place. No, no, please. Felipe cried out. I'll do everything. Everything. Please, don't touch Celesta and Pedra. Not them, better me. I'll do everything, but how? My father never really trusted me, you know. I've always been in the company not even in second, but in third place. I've never really been interested in the true nature of our relationships with clients. How do I explain my sudden interest to my father? That's no longer my problem, Felipe. Think, figure it out. I don't know, put on an act of a sudden emotional upheaval, a reevaluation of yourself, your family values, I don't know. Explain that you suddenly understood how important the common cause is to you. Get drunk with your father, after all. Listen, you're annoying me. Maybe I should just go directly to your father and honestly say, you know, Gerald, let's do this, I need some information. You give it to me, and I won't tell anyone about your son Felipe. How about that, huh? Should I do it? Shut up. There were unexpected new tones in Felipe's voice. No, not authoritative, it was more like the desperation of a cornered animal. Shut up, do you hear? Get out of here, leave. How rude, how terrible. You're kicking a guest out of the house. But it's all right, I'm not offended. I expect your call tomorrow, as usual, with a report. And please give my best wishes to your charming mother. I'll take my leave in the English manner, without saying goodbye. Oh, Irene, the heartbreaker. Celesta pressed herself into the dark corner formed by the shelf and the wall, holding her breath. She managed to see the person who passed by, and her guess turned into certainty. It was the owner of the Transego company. He left the storage room, carefully closing the door behind him. Celesta rose from her crouched position, took a few deep breaths, and moved further into the room. Felipe was sitting against the wall in exactly the same position from which Celesta had just struggled to escape. He was crouched down, hugging his knees tightly, his face was the color of a grayish piece of paper, and his forehead and temples were covered with beads of sweat. He looked up and stared at his wife. Felipe, I heard everything, Celesta said. He seemed almost unsurprised by her words. Or maybe he was too exhausted to show any emotion. Celesta approached her husband and sat down next to him on the floor. They remained silent for a long time, as if each was afraid to break the silence first. Why? She finally asked. Why? Felipe whispered, repeating the question. And suddenly he broke down. He stood up, faced her with a trembling chin and clenched hands. He looked terrifying. And Felipe began to shout. Why? Because I hate all of you. Mother, father, sisters, brother, you. I hate all of you. No one has ever cared about me, ever. No one, ever. My parents even had a replacement for themselves. Why did Mario have to be born? Why? I've become a laughingstock for everyone. I'd be better off dead. It was a full-blown hysteria. Celesta didn't know what to do in such situations or how to help someone. And suddenly, she acted purely on instinct. She straightened up and slapped Felipe hard across the face, the sound of which echoed like a gunshot in the small space. Whether it was from the impact, the sound, or a combination of both, Felipe suddenly fell silent and shrank back. Yes, maybe it would be better if you had died, Felipe, than to betray your family. Tell me everything, Felipe, and together we'll figure out how to save ourselves. Us, he whispered. Us, she firmly confirmed. A few years ago, he had started gambling. Convincing himself that his father would never let him into the family business and that everything would be handed over to Mario when he grew up, Felipe began looking for a way to get rich and show his father up. Soon, gambling became an addiction. He became a sick man. Celesta was shocked to learn that the apartment they lived in had long been mortgaged. The car that Felipe supposedly took for repairs had been sold. Nearly all the valuable items stored in the bank safe had also been sold. He began borrowing, reborrowing, took out several loans, got hopelessly entangled, and then a modest, inconspicuous man with no distinguishing features approached him and offered a meeting with someone interested in solving Felipe's problems. This was the owner of Transego. A month later, Felipe was firmly hooked, and then he was asked to do what Celesta already had a full understanding of. Do you understand that I have no way out? He looked at her with vacant eyes. I'm a scoundrel. I've wronged all of you. I love you so much. But I don't even have the right to breathe the same air as you. She looked at him, pitiful, tortured, trembling with fear and self-loathing, and tried to understand what she felt towards him. Anger? Disgust? Aversion? Pity? No and no. And though no one might believe her, because she doesn't even believe it herself right now, she loves this weak, pitiful, confused person. And even if she's a fool for it, she doesn't care at all about what's right or wrong. She moved closer to him, wrapped her arms around his head, and held him tight. They stayed like that for a long time until Felipe finally said, I understand now. It's so simple. God, it's unbelievably simple. And I've been searching for a way out for so long, and it was right there. I need to go to my father and tell him everything, from start to finish. I have to do it myself. Not you, nor anyone else, only me. I will become a scoundrel and a liar to them, sick and a traitor. I might even break my parents' hearts forever, but I will still be their son, bad, deceitful, disgusting, vile, but their son. Their son who found the remnants of his conscience and returned to them from the darkness. He wiped his forehead from the cold sweat, looked at Celesta, and said, And it was you. You did this. You showed me the way out. If it weren't for you, I'd be rummaging through my father's papers and my mother's belongings, eavesdropping and hiding like a rat. And then I'd be counting money with trembling hands. Thank you, my love. I've never told you how much I love you, Celesta. If you stay with me after what I've done, I'll dedicate my life to you. You have many others besides me to whom you should dedicate at least part of your life, she said, taking his hand and getting up. Come on, Felipe, we have a long road ahead.
If you're enjoying it as well, leave a like and subscribe to the channel.